And welcome to the Children's Media Conference 2020's ever popular question time session. And this is where we'll discuss policy matters and how they affect the industry and the children's and youth audience. Hello everyone, I'm Leah Belletto. I'm a Newsround presenter. I'm on maternity leave at the moment, having given birth just 10 weeks ago during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, before we start, I'd like to say a big thank you to the sponsor of this session, Nickelodeon. Over 50 companies, of course, back the conference in this way, and we're really grateful to all of them, but a special thank you to Nickelodeon UK for sponsoring Question Time this year. But first, I'd like to start with a very short film, and this one is of the 15 finalists in the Pauline Quirk Academy TV and Children's Media Conference 1-minute film competition. There's information on how you can view all of the finalists, of course, and vote for the winner on screen. This particular example helps set the agenda for this session. Take a look.
Something that we often forget about life is that we are given so much. We don't realise how fragile reality is and that it can all be taken away in the blink of an eye. Friends, family, lovers, all separated by an unseen foe. Those simple day-to-day things once taken for granted now seem like distant luxuries. Even with the wonders of technology connecting us in new and exciting ways, we still often feel alone. But as the world stops, as it reflects, it begins to heal. Perhaps being disconnected is what we've needed to truly become connected. To disconnect from the superficial and connect with the humane. As we let go of who we were, our identity which was largely built from the outside in, we discover who we really are, homegrown from the inside out.
Well, thanks to Todd Greengrass for that. It really does show the importance of slowing down, doesn't it? And it leads us on to consider the uncertainties, I suppose, we've all experienced during this recent crisis and the changes to people's lives as well, which is why we thought this session should not only look at how political decisions might affect the industry, but also consider what the future might look like for young people and the media that serve them. And there's all sorts of potential changes ahead, driven by movements like Me Too and, of course, Black Lives Matters and the pressures of economic turndowns and the entire future of the planet under threat from climate change. Some big issues there. In fact, some of those concerns were expressed by the young change makers at last year's Children's Media Conference, which I was attending, and it led to the choice of this theme this year, right here, right now. And we'll also be asking questions about right now and what's next. And our panel is uniquely suited to answer those. And the main questions have been taken from a survey we did across the industry. But you can throw in yours too. We do want to hear from you guys at home. You need to use the heart icon on the top right of your screen to submit a question, and we'll get as many as we can in this next hour. Of course, remember the chat function doesn't work during this session, but immediately afterwards, it'll be open for about 30 minutes for a back chat, so you can discuss what you've heard, ask any other questions of the speakers. So just press the message bubble icon next to the heart. I know we're all getting across Zoom meetings by now, but if you follow those, it should be fine. And very good morning to our panel then. Hello, guys.
Morning.
I'll do a quick introduction to everybody. We've got Tracy Brabin, MP. Hello, Tracy. We've got Ollie Bray from the Lego Foundation. Hey, Ollie. We've got Russell T. Davies, writer and producer. Hello, Russell. Baroness, Beeban, Kidron, OBE, and Charles Lauder from Indie Club. Hello, everybody, and good morning and welcome to this session. Let's start, shall we, with the biggest change to our lives in the last 3 months, COVID-19. We'll go to the first question, and this is from Tracy Liddell from the Studio Liddell and Belinda Ramison from Macmillan Children's Books. And they're interested to know if you think the coronavirus has impacted on children's lives. I guess what we're trying to say here is, do you think children will want and need from the future, the long-term future? And I'll start with you, Tracy. What do you think of that? What will they need from the future?
Well, certainly I would say that children have paid a very big price during COVID. They've been asked to do a lot. They've been asked not to see their friends, their grandparents, extended family members, to not going to school and exams, or potentially their exams, and also, to be more encouraged to go online. We know that there's a digital divide, and everybody's been able to do that. We know that some young people have really struggled with mental health during this period. But of course, now we're coming out of it. There's almost the expectation that, now we're at the other side. Kids can just go back to school in September and everything will be okay. But I actually think there needs to be more understanding about what children and young people have gone through. And we must reflect as well that it was, we were opening zoos before we were opening schools. So I think young people might have something to say about that as well. And of course, those children of key workers have also been going in smaller classrooms and also being separated from maybe their peer groups and so on. There is the sense that we're going to be now in bubbles in schools and so on. So I would say that children now would need hope, support from the adults around them, and opportunities to mix and be friends and family. I'm the shadow culture minister, so I also think it's really important to get our offer for theatres back and running. I know that pantomime is a huge family moment for many, and often the only opportunity that people have to see theatre, and often with their grandparents and extended family. So that's something that I'm working on, but also to thank young people for what they've done. And when we're talking about books, particularly, the fact that they've been looking at opportunities to extend their knowledge, to read more, or create more TikTok videos, more of their own online content, and that creativity. So it's to thank them, but also to know that the future is also going to be rocky. We're looking at substantial unemployment across the whole of the country, and that will impact massively on children and children's poverty and outcome. And just to say to young people, be brave, be loud, make your views heard, and certainly a politician, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. But it has been tough for young people, there is no doubt about it, and it will continue to be so.
Baroness Beeban, there will be a lot of anxiety from children as they come out of lockdown and enter the world again. What's your advice to them?
Well, I think I'd like to answer the first half of your question first, just to say it absolutely has it on children, but what it has done is both reveal and exacerbated privileges and problems. So I think that children are not a big lump here, and in fact that the work that I've been doing with children during this period has been really interesting, because in one sense, the argument that we've been making that the digital world simply does not hold their needs and rights in its design is absolutely made. Slam dunk. It's suddenly a mainstream thought that, are we really going to let this environment hold children without any kind of duty it's basically given lie to the idea that these are not companies with profits and wholly designed, and that then if you are a company with profit and wholly designed, you can design yourself to actually treat children adequately. So it's been actually politically very interesting. And we've been inundated here at Five Rights with both teachers and parents, and to a certain extent, kids themselves, that saying, hang on, there is a better digital world. What's more, we deserve a better digital world. And what's more, government, while you're sending iPads to disadvantaged kids, will you also look at the outcomes online for those very same disadvantaged kids? We have absolutely not dealt with this as a society. So yes, big impact and sort of a big lesson here. I think I would like to just say about the kids themselves is that my experience is that the more they know, the more mad they are, the more they want change, and the more sort of ambitious they are about their digital life. Because the answer to this big societal question is not cut them out and block off. It's actually design it for their presence anticipate the fact that 1 in 3 people across the globe online are under 18. 1 in 3, this is not a marginal matter, and actually we treat them like underage adults instead of treating them like children with specific needs. And if I might finish, because I'm sure we're going to come back to lots of the things that Tracy raised, but the one thing that she did raise, I really want to sort of do a shout out. If you are a late teen child right now, I think there is an absolute carelessness from the political class talking about youth unemployment, talking about a lost generation, talking about how we're going to actually all have to, just ignore this one moment that they are going to go into the workplace, without support. And I understand the government is trying to do, unpaid apprenticeships and this, that, and the other, but it is the language of despair is actually impacting on the children. And maybe, if you forgive me, my very last thing is in the film. I'm sorry, I don't know the filmmaker, but he said something about, maybe now we're pulling out and pulling off. We can build ourselves from the inside instead of the outside. Well, I'm sorry to disagree, but my experience of what's happening to children now is they are being built from the outside, because the only way they have to actually communicate with each other and get access is via something that is actually quite a toxic environment for very, very many of them in important and actually everyday ways.
Actually, I think it's really important that you do mention that, because a session that will, I suppose, explore this today from 4, which is lockdown learning and Bray. So it will explore those issues slightly wider. Thank you very much, Baroness, for that. So the impact then of COVID-19 on the industry has been, well, it's been paramount for all of us. The Creative Industries Federation has reported, obviously, that 1 in 5 jobs will be lost in the near future. And Anne Brogan, Millie Bousset and Ollie Hyatt, and also Lorna Arnott have asked the question about the impact on the children's media industry, public service broadcasting and future commissioning. And I guess, Charles, this one is to you. What do you think that will be? What will be the impact on the future of commissioning?
I think that what I'd want to raise first is what I think that has happened during COVID, which I think in many ways represents precisely what Indie Club has come into being for, which was that we have seen and heard from more different and diverse voices as a result of COVID-19, and the way that it's actually exaggerated in many ways, or certainly brought to a greater attention the disadvantage and disparity between the different parts of the country. And Indie Club's reason for being was quite simply because we believe that the country deserves TV that has a multiplicity of voices, that nurtures a truly diverse talent pool, and actually focuses on having robust and sustainable ecologies in all parts of the country. And I think seeing and hearing from so many different voices has made that even more apparent. I think in some ways there's a consultation that's going on at the moment, isn't there, with the DCMS with regard to public service broadcasting. And I think in many ways that COVID-19, and to a certain extent Black Lives Matter, has been something of a shot in the arm for what it is that public service broadcasting does, that those that are primarily focused on commercial gain simply don't do well. And I think that sense of being able to hear from different voices, the whole sense that that we don't all experience the world in exactly the same way, and particularly seeing that young people have come to the fore in definitely in the Black Lives Matter arena, I think that gives us a sense of where maybe we should look to go. I'm more concerned in a way that too often we talk about making programming for young people. And I think I'd want us to move to a position where we make more programming with and by, as well as for. I mean, my experience with being chair of Contact was a perfect example of how clearly young people can articulate themselves, how they do actually know what's going on, they do care about the wider society, and actually have their voices muted by the way that we currently do broadcasting. So one of the things I'd want us to see is where they are much more involved in what is produced for their consumption. The other thing I'd say is that, and we've seen this, is how often within the context of the Black Lives Matter situation, for example, that it's the young people who've been driving the organizing of protests. Now, in terms of what might happen with programming, I think certainly Channel 4 moving to centres around the country, and the BBC's announcement of the £100 million fund will hopefully, and I say hopefully because we've had false dawns before, see an increase in the take-up of and the making of more diverse programs with much, much more in the way of multiplicity of voices being explored. One thing I'd like to do, because I wanted to go back to the original question, which is the thing about mental health. I think that's going to be a major issue, and the more that we can explore that in programming, in order to take away the stigma that's attached, so that people start understanding that you're not looked down upon if you have a physical ailment. You're not stigmatized if you have an illness that requires, for want of a better term, standard medical treatment. And yet somehow, when it's your mental health, either it's not spoken about, or somehow you're put in a weird kind of box. And I think this is particularly relevant with regards to young Black and brown children and young people who have had, over the last few weeks, pretty much a daily diet of seeing people who look like them brutalized in graphic detail. And the impact that that's likely to have, I think, cannot be underestimated. And to be really aware that in making programming, we're sensitive to how that has developed.
Thank you, Charles. It's really interesting points that you bring up. There is a commissioner session that's happening also today, but at 2:00, which will, I hope, open conversations there. Making content with children in mind constantly, I think, is important. Russell, you have a background in children's TV too. Where do you feel we are left post COVID-19 when it comes to commissioning programmes, or even companies that are independent from, say, the BBC or big companies like Nickelodeon, independent companies, they run out of money. What next? What do you think? Be interested to know.
Yeah, I think COVID's one thing. I think, as Tracy was saying, the recession to come that we're being told about, which is inevitably on its way, is going to be massive. It's going to have a horrific effect. I mean, God help the small indie. And God help, I suspect we're all of a like mind on this call, and I wish there was someone here from, say, a Murdoch organisation telling us that public service broadcasting is not necessary. And we have a government that is absolutely committed against public service broadcasting. And I think it's a very great danger to assume that because we've all rallied around the BBC during this crisis, that therefore the government will suddenly support the BBC. No, they won't. Not for a second. They are fundamentally, philosophically opposed to it and will continue their strategy of dismantling it. And what better cause than a recession in the middle? I guarantee you, in the middle of a recession, that's when they will turn around and say, hey, we'll save every household £157 a year by cutting the licence fee. They will use the recession to attack the BBC. I bet you all 10 quid now, and I'll collect that money off you all. So dark times, I think, obviously, and everyone's running towards, hooray, everyone's running towards streaming, which, and streaming channels have their good points, obviously, but don't remotely care about communities and communication. It's all about entertainment, and some of it is great. I don't want to be anti-streaming, but I think there are dark times ahead, to be honest. I think I don't want to be too miserable, because there's a very good piece of research done for this conference, the Families at Home project video, which I think is available on this platform for the CMC, which is actually very positive about children, surprisingly positive. It points out all the dangers and all the terrors that are happening to children, and it comes up with some surprisingly positive results. So I think in bad times, I just think the last time I saw Tracy Brabin was at a night where the Batley and Spen Youth Theatre, the foundation of the Batley and Spen Youth Theatre, putting on a performance in memory of Joe Cox, in which they put on Les Miserables, performed by 10 to 18-year-olds. I thought it just could be songs from the show. It was the entire Les Miserables. And it was the greatest night in theatre I've ever had, ever. Seriously, it was a magnificent show. And it just kind of proved to me that in a crisis, magnificent things emerge. So I don't want to be the voice sitting here saying we're all going to die and the BBC will close down, because creativity is creativity and ideas are ideas and artists are artists, and in the worst circumstances, in the darkest cellars, in the greatest threat, we will create. So it will survive, and children's television will survive, and children's broadcasting. But I think we all need to be ready to fight.
Okay, fighting words there from Russell. It's now a time, we know, all of us know this, don't we, that children are consuming and creating more content online. And I'm talking digital platforms like TikTok. Ollie, it'd be good to know your thoughts on this one. Are politicians doing enough to ensure that children stay protected online?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there are probably some people that don't agree with me when I say this. I actually think that the UK and actually all of the home nations have got fairly robust policies around how to protect children online. I also feel that the UK Safer Internet Centre is probably the leading light in the whole of Europe around the work that it does in terms of internet safety and responsible use. So I think there's a lot of good work that really does go on. I'm not saying that the industry can't do more. I'm not saying that politicians can't do more. I think the bit that we quite often miss is that when we talk about internet safety, we forget the term responsible use. It reminds me of our first kind of like government approach to this. I think back in 2012, I think, and Scotland. When I was working for the Scottish government at the time, we were the only government that had responsible use after our national internet safety strategy. And I think this is really, really important, because I think what governments maybe need to do more of is maybe continue to obviously provide the advice to industry, to parents, to schools, and to teachers, but also to really think about how we can build up digital resilience in children. For me, that's one of the most important things. And actually, that links, Leah, right back to your very first question in terms of what the children want and need. Because one of the things that I really believe that children will need when they come out of this is that when they do get back into schools, is this really kind of upskilling around digital resilience and digital schools, so that when we do inevitably go into these breaker points of lockdown that we're seeing in other parts of the world, which normally last about 3 weeks, we're using that precious time in school where we've got that human interaction to build up these digital resilience skills, in young people. So I actually see the whole internet safety and responsible use with the whole distance education thing, completely combined. And just also to really hopefully get the debate going and sparking, is I see a big difference between digital education and distance education. And I think that's something that we need to have a wider discussion about as a society.
Baroness Beeban, I'd like your views on this too, because it's a world that children, in many cases, have more knowledge than parents when they're online, whether it's gambling, whether it's TikTok platforms. What are your views on this?
So let me start with the bit that I agree with, which is I think we should absolutely separate our distance learning, digital literacy, and indeed education delivered by digital means, all three of which are entirely different things and need close attention. And I would say all three of things are things that we're manifestly failing to get right. So that's the bit I agree with. I think where I have to disagree is with where the responsibility lies. And I think that there has been a move, and I would say that the tech companies are part of this move, but the government has absolutely sort of absorbed the idea of what academics called responsibilizing children. And or parents. And I always give, and in fact, we have been so upset about this that we're actually doing a piece of work which will be available to you all in the summer. And it's called Risky by Design. we flip the thing. Instead of talking about safety by design, let's talk about what the inherent risks are for children. And if you actually start putting together a waterfall of risks. So, if I say to the gang here, under what circumstances is it a really great idea to routinely introduce strange adults to underage children? Yeah. And we're talking about children, because they don't check their age limits, who are in primary school, who are routinely being introduced through people you may know, quick ad, etc., etc. There's an example. Under what circumstances, any other circumstances, would you routinely put your child in their bedroom in a public profile so anybody in the world can have a look and pick up on their friends, their interests, their things, and so on? So I want to just really say there is a better digital world. There is a digital world that we want for our kids. And I absolutely agree that actually it has a much bigger part to play in education. But at the moment, we are set on this path of actually making children have to adapt to a system that has actually sort of willful blindness to the fact they're even there. And also because we haven't really dealt with the learning bit and the digital literacy and all of that, as was just said, is we're also allowing the big tech companies into our schools, and they are teaching a very partial view of what's going on in the tech world. And what's more, they're taking data and creating brand loyalty. So I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of all of this is we've understood the problem. Nobody needs to argue about whether technology mediates every aspect of a child's life anymore. We know it does. And we got to just start having standards, and we've got to start having frameworks, and government's got to start putting in the floor. And the one thing that I always do say, in these public arenas, because it's very boring being the person who talks about regulation and talks about mandatory standards and things like that, that these things are only a floor. They're not a ceiling. The sort of creativity that others have referred to, and the sort of creativity that we find in the digital world, and that sort of absolute sort of understanding that the K-pop gang had by taking all the seats at Trump's conference, and leaving the place half empty. Do you know what I mean? There's loads and loads of way of hacking the system, using the system, being creative in the system. And I do hope those of you who directly make programs for children consider an awful lot more co-creation, because I think that is actually going to be a very fruitful area of programming. But before that, let us not ask children to police what is in effect global corporations who are really just got profit in mind. Forget it. It's not appropriate.
There's also a children's media conference video that's worth taking a look at if you haven't already seen it, and it's all about kids and how they're consuming digital content, because I think there's a real mismatch of what children are doing and what we know they're doing, particularly from a parental point of view. So I think that's really worth having a look. I want to move on now because we've got another question here. There has been, hasn't there, a huge upsurge, I suppose, in campaigning for and by children and young people. And it's been amazing. We've covered it on Newsround daily, climate change movements, Black Lives Matter protests. But Dylan Rice asks, what do we need to do to be sort of persuade, I guess, policymakers to actually take them seriously and act? Because it doesn't seem like they're being listened to. And I suppose, Russell, what do you think of this? I mean, children are out there, they're taking the lead, whether it's climate change, whether it's anti-racism marches. What's happening here? I mean, children are taking the lead, and they're the ones that need to be listened to for the future.
Well, it's excellent that that's happening. That's exactly what Beeban was talking about, that there's no ceiling, that their creativity knows no bounds. Can I just add in on that technology thing? I loved hearing Beeban say that. And it's worth pointing out that TikTok last year was fined £4.2 million for making available children's data. £4.2 million. It's owned by a company, BrightDance, which is worth £75 billion. So a £4.2 million fine is their operating costs. That's built into their budgets. They don't get, and everything they were fined for last year in 2019, it was said in May that they haven't changed a thing. They ignored all the recommendations. So that's how bad it is with those great big. I hate to be the voice of doom, but I am, because that's how bad it is. But in terms of children campaigning, the most interesting person on planet Earth right now is Greta Thunberg. I think that's just wonderful. The most interesting person in 21st century civilization is a child. And I think all children will be watching that. Well, except I say all children will be watching that. Where do they get to see her? How often is she given access? How often is she talked about? So we're making great big steps, and children are making great big steps, and in a very frightening world. But still, it's all the same thing. It's everything that Beeban was talking about, that Ollie was talking about. We need to build that digital world that allows them access, that allows that voice power, and you can't just rely on them to do it. It has to be from adults as well. I wish they could do it themselves. I wish it could all be child driven, but that's not the way the world has ever worked, and it hasn't yet. So I'm saying all this, and I also feel kind of hopeless at the same time. Do you think this is touching the government? Do you think the education secretary is listening to this? Do you think Boris Johnson's listening to this? Not for a second. So I worry about how we take steps forward in getting those children's voices heard. And I don't know, I'd like you all to tell me how it works, because that's what a session like this is for, I hope, because I'd love to know how.
Yeah, I guess, Charles, let's bring you in here. Will children have an impact on how sort of companies work and what they commission in this time? And what to hear of now after the recent months?
I think it's a leadership issue, isn't it? Like so many of these things. If the people who are responsible for commissioning and making decisions about what ends up on screen make it their business to feature young people and what young people have to say more, in due course, as we see with the protests, in due course what happens is that there's a kind of momentum build that says that this message cannot be ignored. The government was set on a path with regard to vouchers for children's school meals. And Marcus Rashford stepped in and took a position and was supported, and they did a U-turn. I think one of the things for me that continues to be a little bit of an issue is that, whilst I agree with what Russell said about how interesting and important Greta Thunberg is, I think there is also a danger that we latch on to and make into icons individual, very clever, but nonetheless individual representatives of an entire group of people. And one of the things that we've noticed, certainly from looking at who we were spoken to on screen during the Black Lives Matter campaign, that there are a lot of clever, cogent, conscious young people who have very socially conscious perspectives on what should happen next in the world. And I think that if we have only individual icons, it's very easy to say, oh, well, we've seen her before, we've seen him before. Whereas if we had a multiplicity and equally importantly, a very diverse multiplicity of individuals who were taking those stances and being supported in taking those stances, if the noise is loud enough, people start to listen.
Very true. I'd like to open questions now to the audience, and I've been getting a few onto my phone now. And I guess it leads on from kind of having those role models and the Marcus Rashford, but it's wider than that with this first question. It's from Sally Ann Kaiser. And she goes on to say, sort of, we're all more aware of children's mental health and emotional well-being, and it has to be prioritised in these times. But what she is whether broadcasters and commissioners are saying they need to be saved before a of children. And I guess her main point is that we're sort of moving away from the traditional broadcast routes, creating a real change. And does there need to be more support for children's mental health from sort of television platforms, from indie companies? Russell, what do you make of this? Do we need to protect children's mental health? Obviously, but at a time of COVID-19, it's changed children forever, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of worth saying. Tracy hinted at this earlier that children's mental health has become an issue during COVID-19. It's really worth saying that very often the houses in which this has become an issue are houses that have problems anyway. There's problems much deeper than a virus that comes along. There's problems to do with our support and education and the benefits that are available to families and the education that's available to families. These are not virus problems. These are old, ancient, awful problems haunting many families and many children. In terms of from my perspective, it's I mean, children's drama is always about children's mental health in a way. Children's drama is very much about, even a simple adventure story is about cooperating and love for your friends, and that's why it's I have to believe in my job that children's fiction is one of the most powerful things in the world. I say this in a time when one of our greatest children's fiction writers is coming out with extraordinary statements online that genuinely the whole J.K. Rowling thing is genuinely causing me distress, because I cannot work out where she's coming from, and that's a very long and complicated conversation. But I think drama does reach mental health. Drama does impact on mental health, and I have to say that because it's my job. But it's got to be that. And it's I very much miss. There are gaps in children's television now. It's like, imagine if Grange Hill or Biker Grove was on that. My God, they'd be running with children's mental health. Where were those year-round soaps on all the major channels? Why isn't Netflix doing that? Netflix never will do that. It's like there should be a lot more commissions, a lot more shows.
Absolutely. And it's a safe haven, isn't it? Storytelling and children's platforms in this time. Tracy, I think it would be best to talk about your views, I suppose, on how COVID will change children. I know I feel having two young children, very sceptical about coming out of lockdown. But what do you think we can best do to prepare our children for this time?
Thanks, Leah, for that question. I think just picking up on Russell's point of mental health, I wrote on Tracy Beaker back in the day, and certainly those those characters telling those stories about isolation, about yearning for your mum, about really struggling. There was a character with cerebral palsy who always said that nobody would ever her because she wasn't perfect. I mean, these sorts of characters and stories are really important, and that's why I think it's important that we know that in December 2017 the government had a 3-year pilot that they spent 60 million quid on about developing more drama for children. Well, we need the outcomes for that. We need to know what worked, what didn't, because now we need a whole different type of content, which is about well-being and is about coming together as communities and about belonging and your place and your home and the values of a family. I mean, hasn't COVID shown us that even when you're a young person and you don't get on with your mum and dad necessarily, the idea of your home has so much more value, and a safe place has a value. But certainly we're talking about accessing support on creativity. We also, if I may just speak a little bit about the digital divide, that we know that if your family earned £10,000, you're only 50% likely to be connected to the internet. I mean, I have constituents who have 4 children and their internet connection is on the mom's mobile phone. She's working from home to homeschool her kids, doing her job and sharing out the phone with their kids. And so you obviously can't learn in that situation. A number of children who, for example, haven't spoken English since schools closed down will have to get back into school and back into a new rhythm. And so it's about protecting and supporting children with those challenges. And like Russell says, there's so many other stresses and strains on young people above and beyond the internet or drama, which is poverty, exclusion, access to bus routes, to their friends. There will be other economic challenges that really impact on them. But it's something that I'll be working on to ensure that children have a voice in creating content and talk to makers, and let's hear what they have to say and what content they want. It's really important that we listen going forward. And I know that there will be youngsters out there who have got used to their digital life. And then because we curate our digital life, don't we? It's always better than the reality. Now they're going to have to go back into a real world in some way. And that is going to be challenging for a lot of young people. So we need to support, encourage, but also just very quickly about the political side of things. I've been a campaigner for 16 since I became an MP. I go to many question times in schools, one Batley Girls High School. They're brilliant young women, lots of engagement in politics, lots of challenging questions. And it's really important that trying to encourage young people to not just click online on a petition, but to really get engaged in their community. Find out what needs to be done. Is that a dangerous building that needs to come down? Do we need a new bus route so we can go into town and watch a movie? Try and find local campaigns that you can get your mates behind. And it always strikes me that when I go in schools on visits, many schools don't have a school council. So any young people who are watching this, I'd encourage all schools to have a school council, and also remember that you can say to your member of parliament, I'd like a visit to parliament, and we will show you around. And it's one of the joys of my job, showing schools around the building, talking about democracy and voice. And let's not forget, it's only been a few decades since women got the vote, so still an awful lot to fight for when it comes to equality and inclusion. And Black Lives Matter has really motivated people. Certainly, the climate change campaigns has been great, but also trying to encourage young people to get more involved in local campaigning, because when you get a win, it's a great endorphin hit, and you really do feel like you've made a difference in your community.
It's so fantastic, isn't it, to see children taking the lead. But then there's the other side, and Ollie, I want this to be directed to you, that I guess post-COVID-19, and it's a question that I asked earlier, children are growing up much faster than they need to, and will there be a time out of lockdown that children will be able to sort of revert back to that nature, whether it's through play or whether it's through, meeting up with friends to have a kickabout on the green? What's your view on this?
Well, I think that one of the things that the whole lockdown period has taught us is that play is probably more important for children of any age than ever before. I think that sometimes we stereotype play and we think it's things just for the early years. I would be willing to bet that all of the people that I can see on my screen now are very playful in nature, and most of the ways that we run our own businesses and some of the most successful businesses in the world are also kind of very playful in nature. Because for me, play is fundamentally about that kind of social interaction and that iteration about building on things, and that kind of wonderful feeling of joy when you've achieved something at the end of it. And I think one of the great tragedies about play in schools or play in formal education is that quite often as children tend to get older, there are less opportunities for children to be creative and to play as the curriculum becomes more formalized, in different ways. I think we've seen so building on that, I think we've seen some really interesting things during lockdown with some of the most successful schools of where they've really encouraged children to still be social, but in a distanced way. And whether that's been trying to recreate those magic moments of a virtual dinner queue or an assembly or that chance conversation in the corridor, these are the things that have been really, really important for children and young people. And also the other thing that I think we've seen during lockdown is that that teachers being able to let children into their own home has created this whole idea of a massive comfort blanket around our most vulnerable families, around different things as well. In fact, some of the most magical moments on the internet that we've seen, and also through our own research in the Lego Foundation, coming out of Denmark, is that children report not about the best Zoom background that people see of an exotic beach, but they report about the fact when the cat jumps up on the computer screen, or where the teacher introduces them to their family or them children. There's been something quite lovely about that, something quite nurturing about that, which again, it was the same feeling that play gives you. And the other thing that I would say, I was really struck by. I've been really struck by a number of comments that came out. First of all, Tracy's comment about agency in her opening statement, and again how a play has got a lot to do with agency, giving children's choice. But I was really struck by Charles's comment around getting children and television producers to create their own content. And of course, what we know about creativity now is that first of all, creativity is very different from imagination. But if we really want children to be creative, and obviously creativity is a key skill of resilience, and that word has come up a lot during this conversation, then the best way to do that is by having children and adults, or all this kind of peer generation. We can combine imagination and wisdom, come together to create things. And whether this is a moving image, or whether it is a toy, or whether this is a model, or whether this is a fort that's built out of boxes, I don't think it really matters. But having this kind of intergenerational group come together to play and create things is actually a great way to develop not just holistic skills in young people, but also develop this resilience, which we vitally need, like in this time as well. And of course, that links nicely back into the whole conversation, because we need all of these things in terms of developing well-being in young people. So it's all perfectly interconnected.
That's a fantastic question. That was from Alex Washington. So thank you. It sparked so many different views there. And very quickly, I'd just like to ask Russell and Charles what they think the future. This is just a quick question about the Youth Audience Content Fund. What do you think will happen there, Charles?
Let me talk about what I hope will happen, and I'll get right back to what I've said all along, which is that it will be an opportunity for more people who would normally not be seen or heard to have their voices seen, their voices heard, and their stories told. I think we jump on these issues about funds being created. And one of the things that I have as a concern about that is that that's how we always look at those who are disadvantaged, as we'll have a special project, we'll have a fund. And actually what we should be talking about more is how do we integrate them into what we do as the norm, if I dare use that term, so that it's not always about when's the next fund coming about. And we talk about how much has been put into that. If we look at it in the round and start saying, with regards to the overall spend, what percentage is that? Then those numbers don't look nearly as big as we think they are. And I think that it's a responsibility for all of us, because a more diverse storytelling is good for business, is the simple truth of it. So it's not about finding special reasons to do for those who are disadvantaged. The more interconnected we are in what we tell and how we tell stories, the better for all of us, especially with what Ollie was saying about that whole thing of the impact that it has on well-being.
Okay, Russell?
Well said, Charles. Absolutely, completely agree with that. And I think funds are always terrifying things, because the money goes, doesn't it? Yesterday we get told there's 1.5 billion pounds being made available for the arts. Well, it's gone. It's been spent. Thank you. That lasted about a day, I think. And it's just, I do appreciate a government that actually gave that amount of money, I've got to say, and I hate saying nice things about them, but all right, well done. But my God, there's a long way to go. And what Charles was saying about the diversity, the first show I ever worked on in children's television was Why Don't You, which was, I think that's the first television program ever presented by children. I worked on that for 5 years. I adored it. There were no adults on Why Don't You. It was completely fronted by children, and all from the regions, none of it from London. It was Belfast, Liverpool, Cardiff, it was a Scottish gang. It was, that was, I was working on that in the mid-80s. Great template. So these initiatives, I'm only saying that because these initiatives have always been there. And revolutions have to keep on happening. That's the nature of things. You think that program's a breakthrough. It ran for 20 years, that show. And then you stumble again, and we need initiatives to get children's voices on screen. Keep having the revolutions. Keep them happening. Keep the money coming.
And Baroness Beeban, is the future bleak for the Content Fund?
No, I don't think it is. And I think I sort of want to go back to something that I thought was really important that Charles said earlier, which is if we valorize individuals, we miss the big picture. And your question about children's leadership and how we support them, those kids who are leading Black Lives Matter, those kids who are leading the climate change, they don't need our help. They are doing great. And what we should be doing is listening to them and acting on their instruction. So I think that we kind of get pushed into this binary thing of valorizing one community and victimizing the other. And I want to go back to this point about mental health. It's like I have watched some extraordinary things play out around the polarization around Black Lives Matter, and watching people have to take this position and have to take that position, and therefore more extreme and more extreme, and actually finding it very difficult. This is young people I'm talking about, finding it very difficult to come together because of the methodology. I've also been doing a little bit of personal support for frontline workers who are teachers during this time, who have not got the respect they deserve for what they have done during COVID. And on a, let's say, cupcake round, spoke to 12 local head teachers. And what they're dealing with at the front line is they're saying, we're a bit frightened to set homework online because they go on at 4 o'clock in the morning and then they go, we do not know where. Yeah. And we're talking about primary schools in which every single kid is on WhatsApp. Well, last time I checked, the terms and conditions mean you have to be 16. Now, I ask all of you, what happens to a child's mental health if they are navigating something that can get very, very difficult, has absolutely no oversight, and they're 8 instead of 16. So what I'm trying to build a picture is, let's not fall into the binary. I absolutely agree with open-ended play as being one of the single most important things for child development and for happiness and for imagination and creativity. And we got to work out how to get that in the digital world. Yeah. But I think that we mustn't keep on trying to patch up the kids after they've been hurt. We have to start at the other end. We've got to start with, what is the system? What are the rules? What are the needs? And there will always be edge cases, and there will always people fall through, and we don't want a risk-averse life. But one of the things that in my work just comes up again and again and again from people much more expert than me is, do you know what? One of the things we have withdrawn from children is the right to transgress. Yeah, it is really important to know that you broke the boundary to do the thing, to reach the other place and be able to come back from it. But if we keep on putting hardcore porn into the playground, yeah, or if we keep on saying it's normal to have 576 friends and all of them have got to like you before you get to school, yeah, it is very difficult as a child to know which bit is yours, which bit is theirs, and who you are. And I think that a lot of the mental health stuff is really around sort of an inability to build an individuated identity, if you forgive those kinds of words. But I think that we really must not fall in, particularly those of us on the call who are policymakers, into a binary, and we got to design a better system. And then finally, all of that seems to me to leave a really wide open door for people who make toys, who make programs, who make spaces for children to speak, because actually all of that means that they're not getting that elsewhere. And one of the very joyous things, and I don't take Russell's bet. I hope it doesn't happen to the BBC. I hope he's wrong. But one of the joyous things is actually people. Teachers have said that it's much easier for them to go to the bite size because they know that in that context, their kids aren't going to slide off into the next thing. And so there is a role for public broadcast amid all of this. Whether it happens in a digital environment or whether it happens on telly is absolutely irrelevant. There is a role for material that has public interest, public broadcast values for kids.
Very, very. That's. just like to put this question from Kelia Quint to Russell. She says, from dark season onward, you've often sort of written about doom and despair. It sort of feels like we're living in one. Is it time for another kids series in this vein, do you think? And how do we sort of help these stories navigate us to disempowering times? I guess what we're trying to say is, how can we empower kids at this time when things seem out of control?
Yeah, I think there are always stories doing that. When I was young, I was watching The Changes, directed by Anna Hume, actually, which was about the collapse of civilization and the end of technology, which terrified us and thrilled us all and created this generation. Stories were always doing that. I've just got to say, actually, I've loved this entire session. I think what Beeban made, the fleeting mention there of hardcore porn, which personally I think is the greatest crisis facing children in the 21st century, that we kind of skip over. We talk about safety and climate change and stuff like that. How you'd ever write a drama dealing with that, I just don't know. The soaps are doing it. The soaps have dealt with EastEnders has done a story, Coronation Street's done a story, but it's very hard for 7:30 programs to deal with hardcore porn issues. It is, the trouble is, if I worked out a drama that was dealing with that problem, it would go out at 9 o'clock, not on children's television. It is the greatest danger. Every 8-year-old in the country has seen Two Girls, One Cup, and that is disgusting. I wrote a drama about it. It's on All Four. It's called Screwdriver, which is about, I'm not even going to tell you what the screwdriver does. It's appalling. It leaves me speechless, that problem. I wish there was drama that could deal with that. I don't know how to do it.
And just lastly, very briefly from all of you, we've got Jeremy Banks. He wants to look at the biggest picture moving forward. What can we learn from this time, and how can we create a better media future for our audience? And this is to all of you, really. So if there's anyone that wants to take the lead.
Okay. Happy to start. What I think we should be looking forward to is a more localized view as well, that we understand that our community is important to us, our family is important. And just picking up on the public service broadcasting, I really genuinely believe, having spoken to Netflix and big streamers, that we are absolutely necessary in this ecology, that we have the ability through public service broadcasting to tell our localized stories, to have our local skilled workforce, to understand our regions, to deliver content that is challenging and also educational above and beyond large entertainment shows that the streamers give us. I think there is a way we can work together, but I would also, going forward, haven't we seen that during quarantine has really made the case for public service broadcasting and to get culture in homes that have never been to museum, wandering around a museum or an art gallery, or watching One Man, Two Governors, or I bought tickets for Lung the other night. You know, there are ways to use online content, but we need to monetize it. And so going forward, I would say I encourage young people's playfulness and creativity and their sense of collaboration, working together to own their own stories and own their destiny, and to empower them to set up their own companies, to challenge the BBC, to say I want to be in the BBC writers' room. I've got an amazing script that I you need to see it. Have that confidence and that sense of urgency, but also to challenge us as politicians and leaders in communities. Don't take no for an answer. Just persist, and also understand your sense of identity and your belonging is where you're from is so important, that we absolutely need diversity in our sector. We need working class voices more than ever before. We need voices of inclusion and equality and diversity across the country. You know, we need those same voices to tell us what to think and how to be, and to help us through the difficult time to get through the other side, where we are going to have more inclusion. Because my big worry is that COVID will pick off the low-hanging fruit that is equality and diversity, because we're in an emergency situation. Send us back 10 years, all those gains we've made, to almost like a factory setting of what used to be, where it was just lots of, no disrespect to the gentleman on this call, but old white men telling us how to think and how to be. So it's really important to be brave, have courage, tell us what you want us to do, tell us we should be thinking, and start making your own content and work out how to monetize it, because then you've got a career in the art. We need your skills, we need your talents, we need your voices.
Okay, very briefly, because we're running out of time, is there anyone else that'd like to add to the future and what we can learn from post-COVID and our media future? It's a hard one to make really short, though.
Who do you want to go first?
I'll
Go for it.
The first thing is that I hear people talking about let's get back to normal. My fervent hope is that we don't get back to normal, because normal was failing too many of our young people and children, and disproportionately so for those who are from Black and Brown and other minority groups. So not back to normal, thanks very much. We've had an opportunity that COVID has provided, which was to hit the pause button and re-examine what it is that really matters, what our values really are. And I think in moving forward, one of the things that should be part of our values, or I would like to see as part of our values, is that we actually allow ourselves to be educated by our young people.
Can I add just one last thing here? First of all, I would like a commissioner to commission Russell to do that piece of work around pornography in the playground. So if we could have an absolute commission on that one, and he'll have to work out how to do it. But I think there's two pieces. One is less gatekeepers, more artists, more creators, more diverse creators. Stop telling them what to do and allow them to do it. And on the other point is, I would say, all of you who are makers, who don't think that policy is your area, please speak to the government, write to the government, either individually or as organisations, and say, where is the online harm bill? What's it going to do? We want structural change. We want somewhere where kids can grow up reasonably. Yeah. So you have a duty as a citizen as well as a commissioner or maker.
Baroness Beeban, thank you very, very much for that final and closing thought. And thank you to all of the panel. I mean, it's been so difficult just to condense this into 1 hour, but it's been fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know that you're going to take part in some questions from the audience a little bit after this. And there are, of course, more insights and viewpoints in the children's media, a video on demand content, particularly the Perspective On strand, and it's all available to watch in your own time. The next live session is at 2 p.m. today, and that's the first Commissioner conversation with the UK Public Service Broadcasters. And you can also find information on every session, on every video on the Children's Media Conference app. And that's also sponsored by S4C and the CMC website here on the conference platform. So thank you very much for everyone that joined us, for all your questions and for all the wonderful insight from our panel. And from me, Leah Belletto, I'm signing off. Goodbye.